All right, good morning, everybody. Hopefully you guys had a good session next door. So just before we get started, just some housekeeping things over here. Once this session is done, we're going to have a quick breakout, which is located in the expo hallway. And then for those who are interested in the ELCH finals, that's happening in the Solarium room at 10:10. Now, ELCH is hosting a presentation for hackathon, so you can go there. You can, once you see it, and you can also provide input to the judge if that's something you want to do. Just head to the Solarium room. So just to introduce over here for this particular session, we're going to talk today about, ignore cybersecurity in your third-party partner vendor supply chain ecosystem, and I would like to introduce you to Jeffrey Wheatman from Kite. And obviously, Jeffrey has been in this industry for a long, long time. He has worked with over 500 organizations over the last several years, helping clients from a risk perspective. And prior to joining Kite, Jeffrey has been with Gartner for about 14 years, helping customers there directly. And with that, let me hand it over to Jeffrey.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. Good morning. So, the title is very confusing of this presentation, right? We talk about all these different kinds of risk, and we're going to dive into what they are and why we use the terminology, but the reality is you guys may be doing a great job, but the bad guys, the bad actors, they're coming after your partners. They're going after people you do business with. They're going after people who send you parts. They're going after people who collect and process your data. We need to make sure that our businesses are paying enough attention to this. We cannot have our head in the sand, because even if you're perfect, your partners are not. Now, as was mentioned, so I work for Kite. We are a security rating service vendor. That is the last time I'm going to talk about our platform. I'm going to show you some screenshots later, but this is not a commercial. This is about helping all of you identify and solve a very critical problem, which is becoming more critical and more problematic. So some of the drivers that we're seeing, we know, for example, that, you don't know anything because the screen, there we go, that supply chain risk is a board focus right now. We have some data points here. I won't read them, but you guys have access to all of the slide deck. But we're talking about big dollar loss, right? $50 billion, according to my former employer, in lost revenue. We're seeing an uptick in spending around third-party risk management. We are seeing supply chain risk is a board-level issue. They're asking questions. Unfortunately, they're asking the wrong questions, and we're giving them the wrong answers, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. At the end of the day, we are not an island unto ourselves, right? We cannot exist without partners. And when I use the word supply chain, how many of you are in manufacturing or shipping, logistics? No? Okay. So I say supply chain, and what do you think? Well, that has nothing to do with me. But if you're using a cloud provider, that's part of your software supply chain. If you're outsourcing any storage, any processing, anything like that, that is part of your supply chain. It's a digital supply chain. And that's part of the education that we need to do. We have a lot of sales in the U.S. federal government, but if I go to them and talk about third-party risk management, they have no idea what I'm talking about. For them, it's about supply chain risk and vendor risk. So these are the three things, and I actually published a blog on this a little while ago. We, I think, have a very extreme tendency to focus on terms and words, and we use them the way we want. And our audience frequently hears them in a different way. So the three things in this sort of scope, what I refer to as extended ecosystem risk, are very much, are built on these three things, right? So vendor risk management, so your vendors, your partners, et cetera. Third-party risk management, which is typically bigger than vendor risk management. And supply chain risk, which really sort of encompasses all of those things. But if we sort of get rid of the terms and focus more on the underlying elements, this is digital ecosystem risk. This is about the fact that no matter what the source is of these risks, they become your risks by extension, by default. And again, even if we are perfect, our partners are not. So we need to first understand what exposures they're bringing to us. The question I ask people all the time is quite simple. If someone in a critical element in your supply chain got hit with ransomware and they were impacted for a week, how long would you be impacted for? And the answer is definitely longer than a week. Because everyone does real time, keeping stock at a minimum. Nobody wants to keep anything in a warehouse because it's not efficient. Of course, when you talk about just-in-time anything, when you have an impact, it extends. So 5, 6, 7 years ago, third-party risk management was quite simple. If legal was okay with the contract and finance believed that the partner was going to be in business as long as the contract lasted, they said okay, and we moved on. But now, that doesn't cut it. There are so many more things, and I actually didn't even put all the things on here that really we hear, right? So 3 different categories. So we have technical risk inputs, we have business, we have legal, regulatory, and compliance, and they frequently overlap. Underneath those, we have all these other different things, and the other one we're starting to hear more and more about is ESG, right? Environmental, societal, and governance. So a couple questions. How many of you either own or are involved in third-party risk management in your organizations? About less than half, okay. Do you own it or you just feed into it? Okay, all right. So I speak to a lot of folks that are in supply chain, for example, and I speak to people in sourcing, procurement, and vendor management, and I talk to security people, and I talk to IT people, and I talk to COOs, right, because they're operational efficiency and things like resilience. They all know it's a problem, but they don't always understand why it's a problem for them. And that, for those of you that saw me talk yesterday, is a communication problem. All of these things need to at least be looked at. They may not all be relevant for you, but you need to at least look at them and ask questions. Would we care if this happened? And then we have to roll all that up into a story that we can bring to our executives so that we can help them understand this is a risk that we have. It's a risk we need to address because otherwise this is the financial impact. I always simplify, businesses care about 3 things: money coming in, money going out, and if something goes sideways, who's in trouble? That's it. That's what the business executives care about. So we need to link that back to one of those 3 things. There was, I don't remember if it was a white paper or a presentation, but somebody very high in the government in the US said these 2 things, literally without a gap between them. The first thing he said was, cyber risk needs to be a business risk at the board level. Who doesn't think that's true? Nobody. The very next thing he said was this: if your network is brought down because of ransomware, it's too late to go to the board. News for you, your boards, they don't care about your network. They don't know what the network is. You know what they care about? We can't send out bills. We can't collect money. We can't make product. We can't fulfill on contractual obligations. Think about the impact from your 3rd, 4th, 5th parties. If they can't deliver to you, you can't deliver, but nobody's complaining to them. Everybody's complaining to you. So we frequently ask people, how well are you doing protecting your organization from ransomware? And most people say they're doing pretty well. They have a lot of controls in place. They have a lot of tools. They have process. They educate their people. No, don't click that, click this. But at the end of the day, most organizations, even if they're doing a good job internally, are not necessarily doing a good job externally. So here is a little animation that I put together. So just for a moment, imagine that you are in the business of gathering raw materials, you refine those raw materials, you manufacture stuff, you ship it to a store, you sell it, ka-ching, we make money, everybody's happy. Uh-oh, manufacturing just got hit with ransomware. They're now operating at 50% capacity. Well, they're not manufacturing products, so you can't ship it. You can't ship it, you can't get it to the stores, you can't sell it, you can't make money. We go from having a good quarter to a bad quarter because of something you have no control over. and in most cases, no visibility. I took a training class last week. I'm getting certified in third-party risk management. It was actually, I learned a couple of new things. It's interesting. But a lot of people on the phone said, well, we do questionnaires, and we only do questionnaires. Is it okay if we only update those questionnaires every 3 years? I thought my head was going to explode. You get a questionnaire, maybe it's accurate day 1, by day 90, not so much, by day 180, day 365, forget it, it's useless. How many of you use questionnaires? I know everybody does, right? How many of you read your questionnaires? Every single one of them? You must do nothing but that then, right? So the approach that we've used in the past leads to these kinds of things happening because we have a lack of visibility and a lack of awareness. So talking about this extended ecosystem risk management, there are 5 sort of components or elements, right? So there's identify, we got to know what we have, assess, we have to see what it means to us, we have to analyze it, decide what we're going to do about it, then we act on that through treatment, and then we do ongoing monitoring and we lather, rinse, and repeat. So there are some tools and partners and such that we can bring to help us solve this problem, right? So you can bring in consulting companies and they can do the work for you. I was at an event in Seattle in September, and I spoke with a very nice lady from a very large Canadian financial services firm, and she told me they hired one of the big 4 consulting companies to process all their questionnaires at the cost of millions of dollars a year, because they didn't have time to do it, and while she didn't say this, I think they probably wanted someone to blame if it didn't go well. But I will tell you that most people we talk to, they collect those questionnaires, it's a checkbox, they store them. If something bad happens, they go back and they look at the questionnaire, and if you didn't do what you said you did, then they come after you. So it's more of a stopgap measure. About 3 years ago, one of the insurance sort of software providers did a survey, and they asked third-party risk management, what do you do with your questionnaires? And 77% of them said they rarely or never review questionnaires. One of the things we hear from a lot of our customers is we have 7 different questionnaires that we send out. Depending on what we use the partner for, they have anywhere between 100 and 400 questions. And they send out 10 a month. So it's 120, right? 10, yeah, okay. I used to be very good at math in my head, not anymore. So you can bring in consultants to do that, right? You can implement a GRC, a governance risk management and compliance tool, IRM, integrated risk management. You can engage with a security rating service vendor. That's what we do at Black Kite. You can do full-fledged vendor risk assessments, and I have the next slide, I'm actually going to list a lot of these things out and talk about sort of cost and impact and value. You can use risk exchanges. The problem with the risk exchanges, there are like 50 of them, and all of them have different people in them. So they're of limited value unless you subscribe to all of them. There are risk reports that you can get out there. You know, companies like LexisNexis and Dun & Bradstreet and Moody's and S&P, they issue risk reports generally not covering the cybersecurity aspect. So here's a list of things, right? So we can do formal on-site evaluations. You can send your people, you can hire. Very high value, very, very high cost and or impact. You can get a third-party risk written report, right, which tends to be a little bit generic. You can engage with a rating service. You can do a third-party assessment without a report. I don't really understand the point behind that, but whatever. You can read their documentation, and they tell you what they do in security, right? And then we see here, there's varying value in cost and effort. Now, here's the problem with a lot of these things. These on-site evaluations are very valuable on day 1. By day 90, they're good, but not as good as they were on day 1. And by day 180, who knows, right? There's inertia, especially in larger organizations. Now, if you'll notice here, the rating service, that's a real-time thing. That's really the only one of these that does not deteriorate over time because they're collecting data and reporting it in real time or near real time, because real time is not really a thing. But just keep in mind that as you do these things, the longer they last, the less value they actually bring to the organization. So you want to start to think about how you can leverage these, and nobody uses only one, and I will tell you that if you have one really, really critical partner or two, you're going to do a full-fledged assessment on them because your exposure to them is so great. So the first thing we're going to look at is identify and assess. So attack surface management, that's a big area. We're hearing a lot of people talk about it. There are a bunch of different acronyms and nomenclatures. My former employer was great at coming up with new acronyms for something that already had acronyms. They have like 4 different ones, but this is what people typically think about, right? Your servers, your applications, your domains, your websites, all these things. And all of that is true. This is definitely part of your ecosystem. But the reality is this is your attack surface. Everyone in here who you do business with, either directly or indirectly, has an impact on you. The closer they are, the more the impact is. The farther away it gets less. But imagine if 3-4 levels out, somebody they're terrible at cybersecurity, and they get hit with an attack and there's a breach. Well, that rolls to their partner, and eventually it rolls up to you. So understanding all of the different elements. Now, one of the things that would be great, and we're working on this, is I'd like to know who shows up on here more than 25 times, right? Concentration risk. Or I want to know who has a terrible cybersecurity posture that may be 3 or 4 levels removed from me, but has an impact on me. So, quick question. How many partners do you have? Someone you pay to do something for you. Either send you screws or process data or whatever. That's a great question, and people don't ask that question. We're off to a bad start to begin with. So how many partners do you have? You have 10? How many do you have 10? Nobody has 10. Okay. At least 10. Who has at least 10? Okay. 100. This animation was much smoother on my computer. Okay. So I will tell you, I've seen survey data. On average, a mid to large size company has 4,719 partners. Whether you know how many you got, I guarantee you it's more than you think. And it's quite likely much, much more than you think. Has anyone here heard of a company called 7 Rooms? Nobody. You have. Okay. So 7 Rooms is a CRM that caters exclusively to hospitality and restaurants. They are one of the bigger ones. They had a breach in December. They lost 347 gigabytes of data, including a lot of PII. If you've stayed at an MGM property in the last 2 years, your data was probably in there. If you have eaten at, and I can never remember the guy's name, the chef, and he owns a bunch of restaurants, and they're all over the place, and they're at every airport. Yes, thank you, Mr. Puck. Very good. So if you've eaten at a Wolfgang Puck restaurant, your data was probably in there. Now, here's the interesting thing. They didn't actually get breached. They partner with a company who does data transfer. That is who got breached. I spent 4 hours trying to find out the name of that company, and I could not. So, you stay at an MGM hotel. You give them your information. You give them a credit card. They upload that into 7 Room CRM, and that data is breached. Who are you going after? Going after MGM. Not going after 7 Rooms. So that's the kind of extension that we see that people are just not paying attention to. Now, sometimes you may not have any alternatives in who you engage with, and that's fine, but you then need to start understanding and at least communicating to your executives, look, we have this relationship, there's an exposure, we have no options, we should be prepared. Now, the reason why people don't really understand all of their ecosystem is because they're looking at third parties. It's not just technology, it's all these different things. We go third, fourth, fifth, nth party is the term that people use. So now let's talk a little bit about the analysis, right? So Animal Farm by George Orwell, the last line of the book is, all animals are equal. Some animals are more equal than others. I use that when I talk about third parties, because all your partners are equal, but some of them are more equal than others. You can't pay the same attention to every single one of them. So I built this little matrix. So on the vertical, we have how bad would it be for you if they did not deliver what they're supposed to deliver to you? And on the bottom horizontal, we have how bad would it be if the data got breached? So when we tell people to look, we tell people focus on the outside, right? So if it's a huge business impact if they fall over, or if it would be really, really bad if your data got out, those are the things that you want to focus on. So this is the first step of your analysis, understanding where your risk exposures are. You know, if you're buying screws from a company and you can get those screws from a different company, it's probably not that impactful, right? If you're sharing data that's obfuscated, even if it was PII or PHI or financial data, and they get breached, doesn't matter because the data is not accessible. So first thing you want to do is you want to collect a lot of data. Now, this is actually our data architecture for our platform, but you need to look at this. We have 2,100 data sources. That's a lot. If you managed it manually, you probably could not do that. But taking a look at that data, and I always differentiate very clearly between data and information. Data, ones and zeros. Information, what do you do with that when you apply intelligence to it? So you have to convert all that data into information, right? So in the security rating service market, what we do is we take this data and we assign different scores. So we have a financial score, we have a technical score, we do a compliance thing, and we have all these different ways of displaying the information. But the whole point is, can you make better decisions? That is the key thing. You can have all the data you want and all the intelligence and all the tools, but if you don't make better decisions and you don't make decisions that are defensible, it's not all that valuable. Now, when I talk about defensible decisions, it's quite simple. Something bad happens, and somebody from the outside comes in and says, hey, what happened? Your executives need to be able to say something like this. We knew that was a risk. Based on our risk appetite, our risk profile, we accepted that risk. Knowing what we know now, we would continue to accept that risk, or knowing what we know now, we will change, and here's what the plan is to change. Right? That is what your executives need, and I can tell you that is what your executives do not have. So once we do the analysis and we figure out here's where our biggest exposures are, here are areas where we have single points of failure in our supply chain, again, digital or physical, so then we have to look at treatment. So this is a model that we have based off the NIST cybersecurity framework and the MITRE attack. So you can see there are 19 different categories in here. I pulled a company purposely that was terrible, so otherwise it doesn't show you anything interesting. But these are the kinds of things that we need to be able to do, right? When we engage with our third parties, we can't just go to them and say, hey, you suck. We have to go and say, hey, you suck, and here's how you could be better. And if you're not better, we may have to renegotiate the terms of our contract, right? And then here's a step-by-step, right? So if you fix these things, you'll move from, a D+ to a C. But it's really, really important that we don't just tell them, you guys are bad, your posture's terrible. We need to help them get better. And that's where workflow management becomes important. A lot of the tools, including ours, pump data into a VRM tool, vendor risk management tool, or a GRC tool to enable a lot of that workflow, because we as security people, we may have to oversee the risk of a relationship, but we don't own the relationship. And we should not own the relationship. I ask CISOs all the time, how many of you are accountable for the decisions made by other people? And I won't ask this audience because I know the answer and it's always very upsetting. Too many security leaders are held accountable for decisions made by other people. And to make it worse, those decisions are typically uninformed decisions. So we go to an executive and we say, hey, we noticed this problem, and the executive looks and goes, oh, you're right, that's terrible. What do we do? Well, we have three options. What's the cheapest one? I want that. You're sure? Because we're pretty exposed if we do the cheapest one, which is typically not doing anything. No, we're good with that. Something bad happens, and you guys get in trouble. And the CEO, the COO, CFO just walk off into the sunset. Right? Now, that's changing, and we've definitely seen more business people sort of, taking a hit for not prioritizing cybersecurity. And in the US, there is a new regulation coming out from the SEC, who oversees publicly traded companies, that you need to have some cybersecurity expertise at the board level, and we can talk about whether that's a good idea, especially the way they worded it. But board members need to be able to articulate what? They need to be able to articulate material risks as a result of cybersecurity, including and not limited to third-party risk management. We've also seen DORA, which is a regulation out of the EU, which is an operational risk framework, primarily targeted at banks, financial services, and insurance, but that stuff typically tends to float out from there, where third-party risk management is a very, very critical element there, again, at the board level and those kinds of things. You can't just go to them with a problem unless you have a solution. So being able to generate a roadmap and a set of suggestions so that you can work with them so that your partners get better. Now, unfortunately, this is what the tool landscape looks like. And I'm sorry, I know I lived that for so long when I was at Gartner. But this is not an uncommon technical landscape, right? So what you need to think about is what tools are you going to look at? What tools are you going to suggest? Depending on who the 800-pound or 800-kilo gorilla is, you may be able to push back on your vendors and say, hey, you need to do this. Like 7 Rooms as an example, they're not a huge company. I would bet if MGM goes to them and says, you need to do better, they will do better. Good luck, however, pushing back on Amazon or Google or any of the big cloud providers. So the last thing we need to do is we need to monitor, right? And this is the area where a lot of people struggle. If you're sending out a questionnaire, even if you're sending out a questionnaire once a year, you're not really monitoring anything. You're doing a point-in-time snapshot. So here's what a lot of people do and have done and continue to do. So questionnaires. So we send out questionnaires. Now, I'm not saying people lie on the questionnaires. They might. I think a lot of people answering the questionnaires don't know the answers, or they know part of the answer. Do you have MFA? Yes, in 50% of our environment. But yes is an answer. Is it a lie? A little bit, but people aren't necessarily reviewing. And that's why I always tell people when you're sending out questionnaires, you can't use yes or no questions. You got to have some mechanism for them to explain. We see people do a lot of penetration testing. Again, point-in-time snapshot. Any of you ever been a pen tester? Okay, so you know. I was a pen tester for a little while early in my career. What happens when you get in as a pen tester? You stop. But that doesn't mean there aren't 27 other ways to get in. Right? So pen testing is good in specific use cases. People do risk assessments. The problem is there's 50 million different kinds of risk assessments to do. Which ones do you want to do? Right? People are doing SOC assessments. So if you've ever read a SOC 2, I feel bad for you. But in them, you'll find stuff on cybersecurity and privacy, but it's buried, very hard to kind of get through. I mean, I spoke with a guy a couple weeks ago. He's reading like 50 SOC assessments a year. That's not a job I want. Right? And there are a whole bunch of these point-in-time snapshots. But they don't really work other than in the very, very short term. Right? The longer we go between them, the more inertia, the more people move away, the threat landscape changes, the risk landscape changes, technical expertise changes, and as we know, we're starting to see layoffs. Well, who gets laid off? People who don't contribute to revenue directly. Security, IT, HR, right? Those are the folks that tend to go. The quicker they go, the quicker this stuff breaks down, and the faster people don't even realize where the gaps are. So that's why dashboards are really, really important. And if your dashboard is just filled with when was the last time a questionnaire was handed out, it's not particularly useful. So again, this is a snapshot from our platform, but right here, what do we have? So we have a technical score. We have a financial impact score if this partner loses your data. We have compliance mapping against a bunch of different things. We have what we call the RSI, which is the Ransomware Susceptibility Index, which tells you how likely your partners are to be hit with ransomware. And if anyone is interested in seeing any more, stop by our booth. We're at A15, and I'm happy to talk to you, and I promise I'm not a sales guy. So Another thing that people are much more interested in is what's the financial exposure from an operational perspective, from a data loss perspective. If we had issues in our supply chain, how bad would it be? Now, I had a conversation with a new client of ours there in automotive support. And they told me, so we have 3 factories in China. Each one of those factories uses 3 different trucking companies. Those trucking companies go to 1 or 5 ports. They put them on ships from 4 different shipping lines. They ship them to the US, they land in 1 or 4 ports, and then a whole bunch of different trucking companies, and he said, what's my risk? And I went, your job is your risk. I mean, how do we get to pull all that stuff together? So the key thing is being able to at least have visibility into data and looking for changes, right? As an example, some of the big financial breaches that took place, we went and we looked at our score, and the scores were not bad, but they were worse than they were 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks before. So there's a deterioration, and the deterioration is often a hallmark of a coming issue. We also are increasingly hearing boards looking for where's our biggest risk. So this is a sample dashboard there. This shows risk over time. On the left-hand side, you can see, and this is actually one of my favorite things that we have. So it shows the letter grade of the entities, but it also shows the financial impact. So you see on the left about 845 or so, you see an organization that has a pretty good score, but the financial impact is huge, which means it's more important. So to give you another metaphor, you have 2 websites, right? One of them is brochureware, and the other hides your CRM system. You have a ton of vulnerabilities on the brochureware website and only 1 medium on the CRM. Where's your bigger risk? Well, it's the second one, right? Because if your brochureware site gets hacked, you can rebuild it in 2 seconds. If your CRM gets hacked, you're in trouble. We also like to see people implement workflow-based things. Hey, this company's posture changed, or a new vulnerability came out and we're seeing that they have not addressed that. So just some takeaways, and again, I'll stick around for questions and you can come swing by the booth if you want to talk. This extended ecosystem risk concept is more important than individual third-party vendor or supply chain risk. We need to start looking more, I hate the word holistically, but I'm going to use it anyway. We need to start looking more holistically. We need to look at the overall risk landscape, because that's what our boards care about. That's what our C-levels care about. This is a process that can and should be enabled by tools because there's really too much data. When you're looking at your attack surface, remember, it's not just you. It's everybody you do business with. The farther away it gets, the potential less impact. But if every one of your partners is using the same cloud provider, that's your exposure. And most people are not looking at it that way. And I actually had a call with one of my former colleagues at Gartner about 2 weeks ago. They're seeing a lot of consolidation in the cloud markets. So what does that mean? 2 years down the road, you may not be able to do anything about concentration risk because you may not have any options. So then it's about awareness and what can you do, right? Focus on your key partners and your riskiest partners, the ones who, if they fell over, would put you out of business. I had a conversation with a guy 2 weeks ago. He is the CISO for a fast casual restaurant. They have one supplier for chicken. And I said, what if that guy gets hit with ransomware? And he said, we don't have any chicken. And I said, if you don't have any chicken, what happens? He said, we don't make any money. And nobody even looked at the posture of the chicken provider from any perspective, whether it's technical or not. Data's good, ones and zeros are fine, but information, the value you get from applying business intelligence to that data is where you get the value from. Point-in-time snapshots, useless. I'm sorry. It just is. It's a point in time. Things change rapidly and much to our detriment. And I think as the economy starts to turn, although we saw some good numbers last quarter, so who knows, I think people are going to start letting stuff go. You know, I always tell people, if you pick up the phone and you don't have a dial tone, you know about it right away. If email's down, you know right away. If there's a security breach, we don't know right away. So it tends to get ignored. And if you're not doing some kind of monitoring real-time, near real-time, you're not really managing your risk. So this is just a little bit of a bonus. I know I'm over, but so every year our research team out of Turkey, they do a great job. They do great reports. They just published a new iteration of our third-party risk report. Here are some key findings. I think a bunch of you have them. If you want, come by the booth. We'll give you another one. It's actually getting published officially on Wednesday. But the one key takeaway I'll give you is that less third-party vendors were breached, but the cascade was much higher. So it went from 2.5 companies per third-party breach to almost 5. So what does that mean? The bad guys are getting smarter, and we are often standing still. So here's my contact information. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love engaging with people, whether it's about third-party risk or whether it's about the stuff I talked about yesterday, or frankly, anything in the cyber. I am happy to do that. I have a blog that we just started doing. I actually just launched a podcast. If anyone wants to be a guest on my podcast, come see me because we're looking for guests. And if you want to learn more, come see us. We are at booth A15. I promise no hard sell. Thank you very much for coming.